get us started, let me share already. Well, welcome everyone to our 2 o'clock Tuesday webinar. We're happy to see you. Welcome to whoever is new that hasn't been here before. We have a great presentation today. Our presenter is Alyssa Burnham from the Salt Lake County Health Department. Alyssa Burnham obtained a degree in health education from Utah Valley University in 2018. She was a classroom health teacher for middle and high school age students before moving to Idaho to begin a health educator position in the nonprofit sector. She obtained a certified health education specialist CHES credential in 2020 and now holds a position with the Salt Lake County Health Department as a health educator, focusing on opioids and overdose prevention. Alyssa works educating a variety of populations on all health topics, has strengthened her passion for health education, particularly on subjects that have often been shrouded in stigma and misunderstood, such as substance abuse, addiction, and overdose. So welcome, Alicia. The time is yours. I will stop sharing so that you can share yours.
Great. Thank you, Erica. I'll go ahead and share my slides here. That was a great introduction. So my name is Alyssa, and like Erica said, I'm with the Salt Lake County Health Department, and I do opioid and overdose prevention is my main line of work. So today we're going to be going through an overdose prevention training, how to use naloxone to reverse an overdose and respond to an overdose situation. So the goals of this presentation, what I hope everyone will walk away with this, we're going to briefly review what opioids are and the impact they have in our state. We're going to recognize signs of an opioid overdose and how to respond. We're going to know how to obtain, store, and administer naloxone. We'll get a brief understanding of the local laws surrounding naloxone, and then we'll determine some resources available for more information. I like to start all of these trainings with just a little bit of like a disclaimer. We will explicitly be addressing overdose in this presentation. And the more I do this work, the more I find that most people have some sort of personal experience with this topic, whether it's them or someone they know or someone they know who knows somebody. Unfortunately, it's really common that everyone has some sort of connection to overdose, substance abuse, addiction, etc. So I just want to encourage everyone to, take care of yourself throughout this, whatever that means for you. We're respecting the experiences of everyone here. This presentation is not intended to tell people that they did something wrong or responded in the wrong way and they should have done something differently. The intent of this is just to give us some more tools in our pocket for the future. We do the best we can with what we have. So this will just give us a little bit more resources moving forward. So I just want to keep that in mind. I'm going to skip over this pre-survey today. And let's talk about what opioids are. So opioids, it's the name for a class of drug that we often use to treat pain. So it includes the illegal drug heroin, it includes synthetic opioids such as fentanyl. I know that word is popping up a lot around the news and such these days, as well as pain relievers that we get legally prescribed to us. So things like Oxycontin, Vicodin, codeine, morphine. There's a lot. All of these fall under this class of drugs we call opioids. So if you think of anything that you would get after a surgery from a doctor prescribed to you, most of the time, or a lot of the times, they're going to be a type of opioid. Some of the risks that are associated with opioids, and we definitely know that it's a problem. We've seen the billboards, we've seen commercials about it, we see it all in the news. There's a lot of people struggling with a lot of the risks that have been associated with opioids. So the first one I want to mention being tolerance. Tolerance builds really quickly with opioids, more quickly compared to other drugs. So this means that somebody needs a higher or a more frequent dose of the medication in order to get that desired effect, which makes opioids particularly dangerous because the more you're taking to get that desired effect, the closer you are to getting a potentially lethal dose, something that's going to be really harmful and could send someone into overdose. Dependence, so this is when someone is taking opioids for a longer period of time and they begin experiencing unpleasant physical withdrawal symptoms once they abruptly reduce or stop using that substance. So again, they're going to continue to use the substance so that they don't get these unpleasant withdrawal symptoms, and then their tolerance is going to build, putting them at a higher risk. And then, of course, addiction, which we're going to define today as the compulsive use despite the harmful consequences. So all of those things are associated with opioid use. In Utah, they call it drug poisoning deaths or overdose deaths. They're the leading cause of injury death in Utah. This outpaces death due to firearms, falls, motor vehicle accidents. So definitely something that we focus on pretty heavily with prevention. And this is for all substances, not just opioids. However, we do know that most overdose deaths in Utah can be caused by opioids. So each week, about 10 Utah adults die from a drug overdose, and 8 of those 10 are a result of opioids. So a lot of times we'll see opioids in combination with other substances. Sometimes they're prescribed opioids, sometimes they're street drugs that people have obtained illicitly. But it is a large amount. So 4 of those 8 are due to prescription opioids specifically. So people who have been prescribed medication from a doctor who have suffered an overdose from those medications. This is really recent data, which is not exciting to share. It's not good news, but it's new. And I like being able to share new data with you all. So this is just for Salt Lake County. This is the number of unintentional opioid-involved overdose deaths by year. So 2021, we had the highest. We're definitely trending upwards. Not by a huge amount, but still, this is just for Salt Lake County. So more than we'd like to see. Any number of unintentional overdose deaths is not at all what we want to see, and it's definitely going up. Nationwide, some things I like to point out here, this yellow line is for prescription opioid overdoses, and we saw a really big increase in that, and then there was a lot of public health measures put into place to help combat these overdoses. So these prescription drug monitoring programs, teaching prescribers some best prescribing practices around opioids, and we've been able to see that number reduce. However, we're seeing those synthetic opioids, that purple line that we're seeing shoot up really high, is another concern and a really big concern now, and definitely a new one that we're trying to combat. So synthetic opioids includes like fentanyl, and this is what we're seeing often being sold illicitly on the street. It's often pressed into other types of pills or other medications that people buy on the street. So a lot of people don't know how much fentanyl they're taking, or if they're taking it at all. A lot of people aren't intending to take it. So this is something that we're seeing a lot more of now, and something that is definitely concerning. I don't have my chat pulled up, but I did see a question pop up. Oh, so how do researchers differentiate between intentional and unintentional overdose? That's a good question. Those graphs that I was showing from Salt Lake County, those come from one of our epidemiologists in the health department. And so the data that they get is usually through like emergency room data, sometimes death certificate data. And so there's just different ways that they code these things. And just depending on the situation, they'll determine if this was intentional. So someone was trying to end their life, or if it was unintentional. Someone was not intending to end their life. So really sad regardless. We hate to see it either way. I'm not sure. Hopefully that answers your question, because I don't know the exact specifics on how they determine whether something is intentional or unintentional. Okay, so opioid overdose kills because it leads to respiratory depression. So this means that the respiratory system slows down so much to the point where the person is eventually going to stop breathing. That lack of oxygen may cause brain damage. The heart will eventually stop, and then the person will die from the overdose. So I show you this sort of continuum of an opioid overdose, and there's a note on the bottom that I think is really important. There is time to respond, but there is not time to waste. So there is time to respond. There are steps we can take. If we're seeing those signs of slowed breathing, signs of no breathing at all, that is when we want to jump in, intervene with naloxone, with calling 911, with getting the person that professional medical attention they need so that they don't go into the lower levels of this overdose continuum. We want to avoid any brain damage if possible, and then we obviously want to avoid death. So who is at risk for overdose? It's anyone taking opioids. And I really like to stress that, this isn't something that only affects a certain type of people, a certain group of people. This can happen to people who have never taken opioids before in their life. And they take one time. It can be people who get a prescription from a doctor. It can be people who have been taking opioids for decades, who have never had a negative experience with it, who deal with it. So truly anyone taking opioids could be at risk for overdose. But we do know that there are people who are at a higher risk of overdose. This includes people who are taking high doses of opioids for a long period of time, people who have a history of substance abuse, people who have previously overdosed, people who have a lowered opioid tolerance after completing a detoxification program or recently being released from incarceration. We see that quite a bit, where people will be using opioids, they enter incarceration where they're not able to use opioids, their tolerance drops significantly, they're released, and they go back to using opioids at the same level that they were using prior, and their body is unable to deal with the amount of drugs in their system, and they are at higher risk for overdose. People who combine opioids with other drugs, especially benzodiazepines and alcohol, some of those other depressants. People who are unfamiliar with the strength and dosage they're using. So if people are getting medications from anywhere that's not a prescription, where you're knowing exactly what you're getting and how much you should be taking. So if you're getting your substances illicitly on the street, getting something from a friend or family member, they're going to be at a higher risk. So this, of course, includes people who use heroin, people who are alone when they use drugs because there's no one there to see any of those signs that they may be experiencing an overdose and be able to respond. And there's also people who have other pre-existing conditions or behaviors that would put them at a higher risk, such as smoking cigarettes, having a respiratory illness, kidney disease, liver disease, etc. So that's kind of the really heavy part of this presentation. And I show you all of that not to scare people or say this is a problem and that's awful and there's nothing we can do about it. Hopefully that's kind of explaining the problem, and then from here on out we'll be working up to how we can respond and what we can do to hopefully keep ourselves safe and the people around us safe, and so that we know how to respond in these situations. Before I move forward, do we have any questions about what opioids are, what an overdose is, who could be at risk, etc., any of those things? And feel free to pop questions in the chat at any time or raise a hand, and I can do my best to answer those for you. Okay. So we're talking about naloxone today. Naloxone is the life-saving drug. It can reverse an overdose caused by opioids. Starts working in less than 5 minutes. There's no potential for abuse. Side effects are extremely rare. It's distributed to laypersons like you and I, or I don't know about you, but like me, who don't have any sort of professional medical training to use in the US since 1996. And it's been used by emergency medical services personnel for decades prior to that. So widely regarded as extremely safe to use. And I like to think of that as just a part of basic first aid, honestly. The way naloxone works is it's an opioid antagonist. So it goes into the brain, it knocks the opioids off of those opioid receptors and replaces them without activating them, so that the person is able to begin breathing again on their own. Really amazing. Naloxone remains effective for anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes. And that's really important. And we'll touch on that a little bit when we're talking about responding to an overdose. This is just some more on naloxone safety. Oh, this second bullet here is really important. When given to individuals who are not opioid intoxicated, naloxone produces no clinical effects, even at high doses. So this is really comforting for me to know. A lot of times if you're walking into a situation, you're seeing someone, you're suspecting they might be experiencing an overdose, you're not necessarily going to know unless you were with them when they were taking the medication, or you know that they have a history of taking this medication or this drug. So, how would I know if this person has been using opioids or not? And it's comforting to know that, even though I will call 911, and if I give them naloxone, it's not going to hurt them if they're not experiencing an opioid-related overdose. So it's not going to hurt someone if they're not actually experiencing an opioid-related overdose. There's no age restrictions on the use of naloxone. It's the same dosage for everyone. So children through folks in their older ages, it's going to be the same dose for everyone. This last bullet is important as well. Although rapid opioid withdrawal may be unpleasant, it is not life-threatening. So what happens when somebody is overdosing? They have all these opioids on the receptors in their brain, and although they're not breathing, they might be probably feeling really good. They're feeling all of those pain-relieving, sedating effects. And if someone has been using opioids for a long period of time, and you kick all of those opioids off the receptors in the brain immediately, they're immediately going to start going into withdrawal, which can be really unpleasant, really sick feeling, so really uncomfortable. However, they're breathing again, and they're going to live, which is, the name of the game. So it's going to be unpleasant for people who have been using opioids for a long period of time, but it is not life-threatening, and we can continue to get them help, and emergency medical services people can help them through those withdrawal symptoms and make it more bearable and less unpleasant. Okay, laws surrounding naloxone. This is something I like to go over because I think it's really important if we're going to be responding. The Utah Naloxone Standing Order, this allows any participating pharmacy to distribute naloxone to a third party without a prescription. So this means that I can walk into any of these pharmacies who participate in the standing order. I can say, hi, do y'all have naloxone? If they say yes, then I can purchase it and I can walk out with it. I don't need a prescription from a doctor to get it from a pharmacy, which is great. The Good Samaritan Law, this law permits individuals to administer naloxone in good faith without legal liability. So if I think somebody is experiencing an overdose, I can give them naloxone and know that I'm not going to face legal repercussions for that. And then this last one I believe is really important as well, reporting an overdose. This one allows bystanders to report an overdose without fear of criminal prosecution for illegal possession of a controlled substance or illicit drug. So this one's really good because it's so important that people do call 911 in the event of an overdose. And sometimes that can be really scary for people. If you have been using illicit substances, the person you're with has been using illicit substances, you have controlled substances around the house, you know that you are safe from prosecution if you call 911. A couple of things that I'd always like to know about these laws, these last two, the Good Samaritan law and the reporting an overdose one. In order for you to be protected by both of these laws, you have to call 911 and you have to stay with the person experiencing an overdose until emergency medical services arrive. So you have to call 911 and you have to stay with the person in order to be protected by these laws. You're not protected if you call 911 and then you leave the situation. And you're not protected if you respond and you don't call 911 at all. So you have to call 911. You have to stay with them until the ambulance arrives. And then also with the reporting an overdose one, that is the only thing that is protected. So if somebody has something else like outstanding warrants, they are not going to be protected by this law. So I know that's not great for folks. I would love to see something more comprehensive that allows more people to be able to feel confident that they're going to be able to call 911 and save someone's life without fear of being prosecuted. However, for now, this is what we're working with, and I like to make sure that everyone's really clear on that. I feel like that's a lot of information. So if there's any questions about these laws, naloxone is a substance, please let me know. Oh, and I often do these presentations for like different organizations or companies. So I just like to consider, you know, if you're at the workplace or you're volunteering, something like that, I would also just make sure you're covering your bases with the organization that you're with. So do you need to fill out an incident report? Is there a form? There's probably something that you need to do. So I would just make sure that you check with your supervisor to make sure you're covered there as well. Okay, there are currently 4 different types of naloxone on the market that can be used. These are all covered by the same laws. These are all available for laypersons to use. There is a manual injectable, there's an auto injector, a nasal atomizer, and then the nasal spray or Narcan, which I think is a name that we often hear used instead of naloxone. So like I said, all of these are protected by the same laws. All of these the public is able to use. They should all give the same doses. They're all equally as effective. The manual injectable is really common because it's the most affordable. So that's a really good option for folks. Many people aren't comfortable with syringes. Some people are. So that's just a personal preference. The auto injector works, you pull a tab on it and it has an audio recording that'll walk you through the steps. The nasal atomizer, there's a little bit of assembly required. It looks more tricky than it is, but you put it together and you're able to administer it to the person through their nose. And then Narcan, the nasal spray, is also one that goes through the nose. And I'll go through some more explicit instructions on how to use these in a moment. I just want to let you know that there's different versions available. So as far as obtaining naloxone, like I said, you can get it at any pharmacy that participates in the standing order without a prescription. It's covered by most insurances, covered by Medicaid with a copay. Without insurance, it can range anywhere from $45 to $150. The auto injector is the most expensive generally. The manual injectable is the least expensive, and the nasal versions are somewhere in the middle. So naloxone.utah.gov is the resource that I recommend, and you can locate a pharmacy near you, and then you can also locate free naloxone. There's a lot of organizations that offer free naloxone. UtahNaloxone.org is a really wonderful nonprofit. It's local to Utah. They do a lot of virtual trainings, and you can request naloxone rescue kits through them. They come in a bag like this. You get your instructions, and then they send you the manual injectable version. So you get 2 vials of naloxone and 2 syringes. So little vials and syringes. There's also a lot of police departments distribute naloxone, health departments, I have Narcan that I'm able to distribute to folks as needed. Syringe exchange programs often have free naloxone to give. All of our Salt Lake County libraries have naloxone. Anyone can walk into any of our Salt Lake County libraries and request naloxone. Either they'll have it at the information desk or the checkout desk. But no questions asked. You can get up to 1 per day. So that's a really great resource that I like to point out to people. I saw another chat roll through. Oh, they carry the nasal spray in the county vehicles. That's awesome. Yeah, let's definitely connect on this, Russ. Yeah, let's email and then we can definitely do a training there. Okay, as far as storing naloxone goes, ideally you want to store it at room temperature. So we want to keep it away from direct sunlight if we can. So if it is something that's being stored in a vehicle, I know a lot of times people don't really have a choice, especially like local law enforcement. So I would just say if that is the case, definitely keep it in the box. There's no reason to have it open and expose it to sunlight. Keep it in the box, and ideally it's going in a first aid kit or a bag or something that gets moved from the vehicle to a more temperature controlled location when the vehicle is just sitting out. Check expiration dates, replace any expired naloxone. So a lot of times expiration dates will just be on the bottom. They have a pretty long shelf life of, I'd say like at least a couple of years, depending on what kind you get and when you got it. However, and there's been enough research on this that I feel very comfortable sharing this with you all. If expired naloxone is all you have in an emergency, you should use it. So if you know the naloxone you have is expired, get rid of it, replace it, get something that's going to be the most effective. However, if all you have is expired naloxone, you can still use it. It's not going to hurt the person. It's not going to make them sick. It just goes from being, 99.999% effective to being 99.9998% effective. And then the effectiveness just decreases as time goes on. So that's all you have. Use it. However, if you know that it's expired, please make sure that you replace it so that you have the most effective version. Okay. We're going to get into the most important stuff here, responding to an overdose. So I'll walk you through these 5 steps. We're going to evaluate the situation. We're going to call 911 every time. We're going to administer naloxone, support their breathing if necessary, if we're able to, and then we're going to continue monitoring the person. Before I move forward into how we're going to respond to an overdose, any questions on naloxone, where to get it, things like that?
I just have a question on what a overdose looks like, but I think we're about to get into that.
We are just about to get into that, and that's a great question. Okay, so step 1, we're going to evaluate. We're going to figure out, is this person overdosing? What would I even look for? So I think I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to skip to this next one because this will just give us the signs that we're looking for. Signs of an opioid overdose. So small pinpoint pupils, that is a key sign of what an opioid overdose could look like. That one can be kind of hard to tell. So some other signs that we're looking for are discolored fingernails and lips. So in people with lighter skin tones, this is going to be more of like a bluish, purplish color. In folks with darker skin tones, it could be more of a gray color. But this is a sign that the person may not be getting enough oxygen. If the person is not responding, they won't wake up, limp body, that could be signs of an overdose as well. Shallowed breathing or stopped breathing. So if they're not breathing at all, the breathing is really shallow. If there's a faint heartbeat, sometimes there could be a gurgling or choking noise. Sometimes people will describe it as, it sounds like they were snoring really bad. They could be blowing bubbles with their saliva. If we see one or all of these signs, we can assume that this may be an opioid-involved overdose. So we're looking for one or all of these signs. and they're all going to clue us into that this person is not breathing correctly. And that could clue us into if this could be signs of an overdose caused by opioids. So if you see one of these signs, you see all of these signs, you're going to try to stimulate the person awake. So try to wake them up. You can shout their name. If you don't know their name, you can shout something at them that they might not want to hear, like, I'm going to call 911, or I'm going to give you naloxone. See if that gets them to respond. You can try to stimulate them with pain. We don't want to injure the person, just enough pain that it would cause any responsive person to respond. A sternal rub, so rubbing your knuckles in the center of their chest on that bone. You can rub the knuckles on their upper lip. Again, we don't want to cause any injury. We just want enough pain that it would stimulate them. So if they do respond, continue to monitor them because they're probably still not in a great place. Continue to monitor them, monitor their breathing and pulse. Try to keep them awake and alert if their breathing is shallow or stopped. So if those symptoms get worse, then we're still going to call 911 because they're not doing okay. If they do not respond, you shout at them, you tried to give them a sternum rub and they don't respond, we're going to call 911. Okay, so that's our second step, call 911. We're going to report the person's breathing has slowed or stopped. They are not responsive. We're going to give them the location that they can find us at. And then we're going to follow the dispatcher's instructions. So if appropriate, the 911 operator, they could instruct you to begin CPR. So I'm going to try to lay this out as clear as possible because I get some questions on this sometimes. So someone's unresponsive, you call 911. There's two different things we're looking for, either signs that their heart is beating or not, or signs that they are breathing or not. If their heart is not beating, so you're checking for a pulse, you're not feeling a pulse anywhere, their heart is not beating, then we want to continue with CPR protocols because that is the most important thing, is that we get blood pumping through their body. So then the 911 operator can help you with that, can walk you through CPR protocols if you don't know how to do it. So no pulse, we're going to go the CPR route. If they do have a pulse and there is no breathing, so their breathing is slowed, they're not breathing at all, then we're going to follow through with giving them naloxone because this may be signs of an overdose. Say it one more time. If there's no heartbeat, no pulse, we're going to do CPR. If they do have a pulse, but they're not breathing, not responsive, we're going to assume this may be an overdose, and we may need to give them naloxone. If you have to leave the person experiencing an overdose for any period of time, you can place them in a rescue position. This is just rolling the person onto their side. You can put a hand under their head to support their head and then pull a knee forward in front of them so that they don't roll over onto their stomach. Sometimes people do vomit when they're experiencing an overdose, so we want to make sure that doesn't impede their breathing any further. So if you're the only person there and you have to get a phone to call 911 or you have to go get your naloxone, you just want to put them into this rescue position. Okay, so then we've evaluated the situation. We have called 911 and now it's time to administer naloxone. So naloxone only works if there are opioids involved in the overdose. We know most overdoses do involve opioids, not all overdoses. But we also know that it's not going to hurt the person if you do give them naloxone and they're not experiencing an opioid-related overdose. So again, there's these 4 different types. I'll give like a brief instruction on each of these types. So the intramuscular injectable, everything should come with very explicit instructions. The intramuscular injectable, the main thing with it is that it goes into a large muscle. So shoulder, thighs, butt, it goes into one of these big muscles. You don't have to worry about finding a vein or anything like that. You just pop open the cap on your vial and you place your syringe in it. You pull the whole dose up and you insert it into one of those large muscles. And if the person does not respond within 3 minutes, you can give them a second dose. That's going to be the same for all of these types of naloxone. You give them 1 dose, you wait about 3 minutes to see if they respond, and if they don't respond, you give them a second dose. All of these should come with 2 doses. These manual injectable rescue kits have 2 doses. The boxes of Narcan have 2 doses in them. You should always have 2 doses because sometimes the person just needs more naloxone to knock enough of those opioids off the receptors in the brain to get them to start breathing again. I'm not going to watch the videos here. The auto injector is really cool. I've never seen one. I think they're kind of expensive and maybe a little bit more difficult to get your hands on. But if this is what you have in a situation, it should be a really simple one to use. You pull the red tab on it, and then you place the end of it onto the person's outer thigh. The needle will go through any clothing, and you hold it in place. And like I said, this one has audio that will talk you through this whole process. The manual injectable, or not the manual injectable, the nasal atomizer. This one comes with instructions as well. This is another one I don't see very often. If you do get it, I would just become familiar with how to put it together. Looks more difficult than it is, but then again, it just goes into a person's nostril, and if they don't respond within 3 minutes, you're going to give them the second dose. Narcan, or the nasal spray, this is what I see most often, the manual injectable and the Narcan, or the nasal spray. And then this is what I have. The Salt Lake County libraries have the Naloxone rescue kits from Utah Naloxone. So they have the manual injectables. So your syringe and your vial. I believe they also, a lot of them do have Narcan as well, but that's more for the staff to respond to overdoses. But what they're distributing is going to be those manual injectable kits. So Narcan, the nasal spray. I see this one a lot. This is what I get to distribute. So this is the one that I'm the most comfortable and most familiar with. You get, maybe I'll stop sharing for a second so that you all can see me on camera a little bit better. So they come in a box like this. Mine is expired, which is why I have the word expired written all over it, so we don't accidentally use it for anything. Inside, you get 2 doses of the Narcan nasal spray and your big sheet of instructions and disclaimers and all of that. So you get 2 of these blister packs, and then all you do is you open up the blister pack and you get your little nasal spray. So there's 1 dose in a nasal spray. It goes in the person's nostril, so they'll be laying on their back. It goes in their nostril. It only has to go as far up so that your fingertips touch the bottom of their nose. So you don't have to worry about getting it all the way up there. You don't want to just keep it at the very end. Just put it until your fingertips touch the bottom of their nose. And then there's a plunger on the bottom. You can only administer 1 dose, so you just press it and you give them the dose. It's really simple, which is why it's the one that I like to teach people how to use the most. It's also really common, so I think it's a good one to learn how to use. There's always instructions on the front part of the box that will walk you through it, which is really helpful. But it's really simple. The only thing that I would caution people with Narcan is if you can remember, which I know is not always an option when you're in kind of an emergency situation. But if you can't remember, I would say don't place your thumb on the plunger until you are ready to administer it. So if you can, keep all your fingers away from the plunger until it's inserted in their nostril and then press it in. Because if you're moving the person around, you're getting down, you're trying to get it in their nose and you accidentally press it before it's in the right place, then there goes a dose of naloxone. And luckily you have a second dose and you have an ambulance on the way, but just to make sure that we're not wasting any, I would do that. I'm trying to think of some questions I get on Narcan. One of the questions that I get is, well, if the person's not breathing, how is the nasal spray going to work? Like if they're not able to inhale the medication, how is it going to work? And I'm not a pharmacologist, so I don't know the exact specifics of how the medication works, but it's made for people who are not breathing. And I would assume it just permeates those mucous membranes in the nostrils and is able to get into the bloodstream. But yeah, the person does not need to be able to breathe. Like with other nasal sprays we may have used for allergies or something, you don't have to inhale it in order for it to be effective. And then again, like with all of these versions of naloxone, you wait about 2 to 3 minutes. If they're not responsive, you give them that second dose. And then hopefully by then you will have your paramedics there who can continue to give them naloxone if they need more and continue to monitor the person. Okay, so some more key things here. Naloxone only lasts between 30 and 90 minutes, while the opioid effects might last much longer. So if the person has a large amount of opioids in their system, as that naloxone wears off and leaves those receptors, the opioids will reattach to those receptors. And that person could go back into overdose, which is why we always call 911 and we always make sure that the person is getting that professional medical care that they need, because we don't want them to go back into overdose. So it's very important that you stay with the person, wait out the risk period. Some folks, if they're experiencing those really unpleasant withdrawal symptoms right away, they might want to use again, which sounds like a bad idea. It is a bad idea. You don't want the person to use again, because just because they're not feeling the effects of the opioids, they do still have opioids in their system, and we don't want to introduce any more because that's really going to increase their risk of going back into overdose once that naloxone wears off. So we want to stay with the person, wait out the risk period, and hopefully at that point we'll have the person with medical professionals who can help with that. Okay, we're almost done here. Supporting the person's breathing. So you've given them the naloxone, they're responsive. This is just if for whatever reason we're not able to get that person to an emergency room or get an ambulance there right that second. They're responsive. We're going to continue monitoring their pulse and breathing. Again, if they don't have a pulse, we're doing CPR protocols. If they're not breathing, we've already given them naloxone. It may be appropriate to administer rescue breaths because oxygen is critical when someone is not breathing, and that can be one of the most important steps in preventing overdose death. So this is something I only recommend if you know the person, you're comfortable with exchanging pathogens with them, or if you have a CPR face shield somewhere with you. So always make sure that you're able to protect yourself in these situations. But this can be really important to help somebody and keep them breathing, prevent some of that brain damage from the lack of oxygen, and then prevent them from their heart stopping and them eventually dying from their overdose. So protect yourself. If you have a face shield, now's a good time to double check your first aid kits and see if you have one, and then make sure that you know how to use it so that you're able to protect yourself in these scenarios. And then rescue breathing is really simple. The person's laying on their back. You just make sure their airway is clear by looking inside. You will just tilt their head back, pinch the nose closed, and then form a seal over their mouth with your mouth and give 2 slow breaths. While you're giving the breaths, you can look over at their chest and you're looking for chest rise and fall. If you see their chest rise and fall, you're doing it right, and you can continue with another rescue breath about every 5 seconds. I know nowadays if you take a CPR certification course, they don't advise any rescue breathing, and that's because the person that they're treating in those scenarios does not have a pulse. So we're going to give that person chest compressions, and we're not going to stop the chest compressions to give them rescue breaths. In this situation where the person does have a pulse, but they're just not breathing, rescue breaths can be really helpful, which is why it's advised in these situations. Again, if they start breathing again on their own, you can roll them into that rescue position, just because sometimes they do vomit and we don't want them to have any further trouble with breathing. Okay, and then the last thing is just that aftercare. Just continue to stay with the person until the EMS arrives. try to keep the person from using again if possible. Yeah, and just monitor them, monitor their breathing, monitor their pulse, and make sure they get that professional medical care. Okay. It's a lot of information. I'm happy to send out an email if it could get to folks with some more resources, but some of my favorite ones, naloxone.utah.gov, that's where I would go to find pharmacies that participate in the standing order, as well as free naloxone resources near you. Utah Naloxone provides a lot of great trainings like this. They distribute those naloxone rescue kits. They have a lot of really good information as well. KnowYourScript.org has a lot of good information about prescription drug safety. They also have a map where you can find prescription drug drop boxes near you so you can get rid of those unused medications so you don't have to worry about having them in your home. And then opidemic.org just has a lot of information about the opioid epidemic in Utah and some information on that. So those are some good places to start. I'm going to skip the post survey here. And yeah, if you have questions about this training, about where to get naloxone, if you're looking to get your hands on some Narcan, any of that, my email is right there. Before I wrap things up here, what questions do folks have about responding to an overdose, about naloxone, about opioids, about any of it? That's totally fine if there are no questions. Happy to answer questions later if folks want to email.
If you have any questions, now is your chance. But yeah, I don't see. Oh, there is one question. Maybe this is Sadie's question. Which type does the Salt County Library distribute?
They have the manual injectables. The manual injectables, and they get them from Utah Naloxone. So they come in these little packets like this, and you get 2 syringes and 2 vials along with your instruction sheet.
And another question is, how do you store it?
You want to keep naloxone out of direct sunlight and extreme temperatures. So if you can store it indoors, that's great. Some people like to carry it in their vehicles. So with that, ideally, you can take it. Ideally, it's in a situation in a first aid kit or something that goes from the vehicle to inside so that it doesn't stay in the vehicle and endure all those extreme temperatures, just because it will reduce the effects of the naloxone.
Any other questions? So before you leave, if you're a county employee, make sure that you fill out the survey so you get your healthy lifestyles points. Want to thank you, Alicia. This is great information. I did have a presentation from you before, so I found very refreshing. Good reminder for us. Just before all of you go, let me just tell you what we have coming up next week. I mean, next month. It's the Fall Prevention Awareness Month. And we line up some wonderful presentations. September 6th at 2 p.m. We're going to have a presentation, Safe Walking Pathways in Salt Lake County by Paige Corley. Many of you know Paige. She's awesome. And then, but we're getting ambitious. We want to do it hybrid. So we're going to do it Mountain Olympus Senior Center. And at the same time, we're going to do it through Webex. So it will be Tuesday at 2 p.m. And so on the screen, there is the lineup for the whole month of September. But if you have questions, you can always shoot me an email and call me. My phone number is on the screen and we can get you all situated. Thank you so much, Alicia, for being here today, everyone. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.